Of all the various races that are known to inhabit the galaxy, the Necrons are perhaps one of the most unique. Instead of being creatures of flesh and blood, which they themselves once were in ages past, the Necrons of today are an entirely mechanical species, sporting an appearance that is superficially similar to that of robotic skeletons. A Necron's physical form is fashioned primarily from necrodermis, a substance that is effectively a type of living metal. Not only is necrodermis an incredibly strong and resilient substance, but it has the ability to, over time, regenerate and repair itself from any damage inflicted upon it, much like living tissue. This, as a result, makes the Necrons an exceptionally tough and durable race, capable of withstanding the kinds of physical trauma and environmental hazards that would often prove fatal for organics. And yet, should a Necron construct suffer any sort of extreme or catastrophic damage, it will, in the majority of circumstances, undergo a process known as phasing out, in where they are teleported away towards the nearest tomb complex in order to be repaired and rebuilt. However, should the damage sustained by a Necron indeed prove to be irreparable, then their consciousness will instead be simply transferred into an entirely new body. This effectively renders the Necrons, for all intents and purposes, immortal. Such procedures, however, are not without their flaws, for the more frequently a Necron undergoes this process of, for want of a better term, resurrection, decay will inevitably begin to occur within their personality engrams, resulting in more and more of their individuality and sense of self being gradually and permanently lost, until the Necron becomes little more than a mindless automaton. Not only this, but following in the wake of the Great Sleep, an event which saw the Necron race being interred within stasis for approximately 65 million years, an ever-increasing number of tomb complexes would begin to malfunction and fall into disrepair. This will not only render hundreds of thousands, if not millions or even billions of Necrons incapable of being reactivated, leaving them forever trapped in a state of suspended animation, but more and more tomb complexes will find themselves, for one reason or another, unable to transfer the personality engrams of fallen Necrons into new bodies, resulting in them becoming forever lost. While the forgers on the Necrons are indeed capable of constructing new bodies or shells for those that fall in battle, the number of individual personalities amongst the Necron race appear to be both finite and utterly irreplaceable resources. This then leads to an important question. Are the Necrons slowly drifting towards their complete and total extinction? Initially, it would appear that the Necrons are indeed a slowly dying race, for once the Necron tier, the original flesh and blood predecessors to the Necrons themselves, fully underwent the process of biotransference, which granted members of the race new, entirely mechanical bodies, they would in turn lose all access to the various reproductive processes that are inherent to most forms of biological life, effectively condemning their species to a fate known as functional extinction. After all, while the creation of new physical forms is evidently not an issue for the Necron race as a whole, developing entirely new individual personalities and consciousnesses from scratch is an altogether different matter. As such, while it is clearly impossible for any new Necrons to be forged from living Necron tier, due to the Necron tier themselves being a race that has long since gone extinct, would it instead be possible to create new Necrons by subjecting other species to the biotransference process? After all, according to the novel Twice Dead King Ruin, a number of Necron tier nobles were known to have had their pets, such as Scolopendra hunting beasts, also undergo biotransference, resulting in such creatures being transformed into various types of canoptech construct. Because of this, it's entirely reasonable to assume that the biofurnaces of the Necron tier empire, if they are indeed still functional, could be used to transform creatures such as humans, Eldari, Tau, or other such sapient organisms into a type of Necron construct, or even, for want of a better term, an entirely new Necron subspecies. Indeed, according to the 3rd edition Necron Codex, human blanks, individuals that project a negative warp presence, were often captured and forcibly subjected to biotransference, leading to the creation of terrifying constructs known as Necron pariahs. While there is still some lingering debate as to whether or not such beings ever truly existed, it is worth noting that in 993 M41, as detailed within the 7th edition Necron Codex, the cryptech known as Illuminor Xeris would, through sheer luck, succeed in capturing a type of blank known as a Calexis assassin. Xeris would then attempt to acquire a number of additional such specimens for use in his research due to having become fascinated by the unique properties of his newest test subject. Because of this, there is a distinct possibility that Xeris' experiments could one day result in the successful creation, or perhaps even recreation, of Necron pariahs. In either case, the idea of subjecting a non-Necron tier organism to biotransference in order to create a new type of Necron construct is, in theory at least, a completely feasible one. Another potential possibility would be for the Necrons to engineer entirely new personality engrams from scratch, essentially creating a series of artificial intelligences. Such an act is not entirely unprecedented, for as shown within the novella Devourer, a small number of Necron tier, specifically those esteemed leaders or high-ranking nobles that perished prior to the events of the Great Transference, would have their personalities artificially replicated and subsequently installed within new necrodermis-forged bodies. However, such intelligences, or as they would come to be known by their peers, false Necrons, would prove to be pale limitations of the personality engrams sported by true Necrons, with such constructs being little more than vague approximations of the beings that they once were, with no true intelligence of their own to speak of. So if subjecting other races to biotransference or even utilization of artificial intelligences are ultimately both non-viable options when it comes to the reproduction and propagation of the Necron race, then this would appear to leave but one last hope to stave off extinction: their very souls. While the exact details regarding the biotransference process itself remain fairly ambiguous, some have suggested that the biofurnaces would, for lack of a better term, scan the spiritual essence of an individual in order to generate a personality engram which is compatible with their new artificial body. But given that it remains a hotly debated topic as to whether the Necrons are indeed soulless entities or not, it should be worth noting that it is just as likely that the personality engrams of the Necron race were created by simply scanning the brainwaves and neural pathways of individuals to serve as a template, although there is no way of knowing for certain. But if such individual personalities and consciousnesses are indeed based upon one's soul as opposed to being derived solely from one's mind, then, in theory, if the Necrons could somehow artificially generate new Necron tier souls, these in turn could serve as the foundations for new personality engrams. However, the very notion of creating a new soul from scratch would, at least initially, appear to be beyond the realm of possibility, even for a race as technologically advanced as the Necron tier were in their prime. Despite this, there does exist a race that may very well have the ability to perform such an act: the Squats. The Squats of the Leagues of Votan, or Kin as they prefer to be referred to as, are not only capable of engineering and creating entirely new substrains of their species, known as clone skynes for the purpose of fulfilling specific roles within their society, but are even capable of engineering the very souls of such individuals. However, whether or not this engineering of souls is the creation and generation of entirely new spiritual essences, or the simple modification of a clone skyne's pre-existing soul, is not entirely clear, although there is an admittedly strong possibility that this engineering of a kin's soul is purely in terms of modification and alteration as opposed to creation. After all, a nascent clone skyne's soul will be, in layman's terms, made brighter or dimmer depending upon the role required of them within society, with acts of the former being performed in order to create psychers or analogues to Imperial navigators and astropaths. But if the Squats do in fact have the capability to create new souls from scratch, then such technology could very well be appropriated by the Necrons should they ever learn of its existence. As such, if the Necrons were able to develop the means to manufacture souls of their own, then this could result in them being able to produce an entirely new generation of true Necrons. But even then, there's no guarantee that such methods would prove successful, for as the very existence of blanks, pariahs, and even true artificial intelligences, such as the Men of Iron, proves, one does not necessarily require a soul in order to have a personality, sense of self, or even life. Ultimately, it would appear that the best hopes the Necrons have in preserving their species, history, and culture lies in the creation of false Necrons, regardless as to whether or not such constructs are themselves artificial intelligences or non-Necron-tier beings that have been subjected to biotransference. The Necron-tier Empire may very well have no choice in the matter, for if they don't find some way to replenish their ranks, then they, despite their apparent immortality, are condemned to extinction, and, eventually, obscurity. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching!